First of all, Bitcoin is not a comp by nature or in its original form. Bitcoin doesn't allow really for complex type of applications to emerge on top of its network. It was from the beginning, since its inception, it was designed as a peer-to-peer cash payment system. However, we've really been seeing a lot of small incremental adjustments that have happened to Bitcoin, but they've really got the a lot of developers' attention, specifically at the beginning of last year. So just because of the fact that Bitcoin was quite limited in its usability, we saw certain networks that were building on top of Bitcoin, things like Stacks, for instance, where rather than allowing certain applications and tokens to be deployed directly on Bitcoin, it would emerge on this complementing layer, if you may. So Stacks has been around for a really long time. Stacks has been, and its main net went live about 2 years ago, but the network itself was being developed since 2018. But Stacks was, I would say, the leading solution here because again, yeah, just because of how early they have been around. However, with some of those small incremental changes that I was just talking about, certain developers were able to, for lack of better words, use a loophole in allowing new types of transactions to emerge on top of Bitcoin. This gave the idea to what is now known as ordinals. So ordinals, the best way to think about it is that they are the NFT-like equivalent of what's on top of Ethereum, but it's a lot more superior, and it's quite surprising for people who are not well aware of this because NFTs on Ethereum, the NFTs itself doesn't necessarily live on top of the network. The image could be living somewhere else, but the NFT points at it. While with ordinals on top of Bitcoin, whatever type of media that you are looking at, whether it's a picture, whether it's a video, whatever type of media that we are talking about, it actually lives on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. So why is this significant? This is significant because as we've clearly highlighted throughout this presentation, Bitcoin, once it reaches 2140, where every 4 years, the amount of newly generated units of BTC, it keeps decreasing, which essentially means that for the miners that are supporting the security validation of the network, once this block subsidy or once this economic subsidy program, once it ends, there isn't really any type of incentive for them to keep supporting the network. So that essentially means that they need a new type of revenue, which as we can see from the chart on the right here, if the block rewards goes down, but the transaction fees are starting to grow, then this acts like a neutralizing balancing act. So that's the first cool aspect about what we saw specifically over the last year. But what was even more exciting and more thrilling is the fact that this loophole that I was talking about that allowed for more complex type of transactions to emerge on top of Bitcoin itself. Now this is giving a way to an insanely expansive ecosystem of new networks that are emerging on top of Bitcoin. So what do I mean by that? Just like Ethereum has its own layer two landscape, things like Arbitrum and Optimism and Polygon, all the networks that are anchored to the security of Bitcoin, but they help scale the limitations of Ethereum. We're now seeing the same thing with Bitcoin. And it's quite exciting because a lot of them have been developed or were being looked at over the past year or so. But really, this trend just accelerated so much throughout last year specifically. And now we are starting to see a plethora and a plurality of networks that it was not even thought that this was possible 12 months ago. Why is this crucial? Again, we could start to see more and more things being done on top of Bitcoin, things like DeFi applications, things like social media applications, even games in certain areas. We saw a couple of early models of the equivalent of a Google Drive and OneDrive on top of Bitcoin. All of that is now starting to become more and more possible because of this new loophole that was exploited by the developers. And when I say exploited, it doesn't have a negative connotation here. It just means that they were able to use a specific technical limitation to their advantage to enable more things to happen on top of Bitcoin. So that's wonderful because, again, we don't want to overload the underlying Bitcoin network, but we most certainly want to see more innovations and more applications built on top of it.
Yeah.
First of all, because we want Bitcoin to become more exciting, since it is the most decentralized network, we want it to be the settlement layer for more and more things to happen. And we want the miners who are the bedrock at the foundation of this network allows it to be the most secure Apple store, if you may. We call that Ethereum, the global app store. But if we want Bitcoin to become the most secure global app store, then we want them to be well off financially speaking. And with this kind of thing, that's exactly the direction that we're headed towards.